Hello, everyone. This is Under the Mayo, and I'm here with my guest, WaifuRuns from the speedrunning community. Waifu, how are you doing?
I'm doing phenomenal. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing great. I've wanted to talk to you for a while. I started watching your stuff maybe a few years ago. Around I think I saw some Resident Evil 2 stuff. I don't watch a whole lot of speedrunning, but I've always liked your breakdowns. You did a really good one on Dead Space as well. Your new one on RE4 Tactics is great. And so thanks for coming on here and having a talk with me.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. That's really cool to hear that you enjoyed the content,
Hell
especially
yeah.
the stuff that's really old. I mean, I've been doing YouTube for a while, but it always feels like, oh yeah, I just started doing YouTube because the content I'm doing now is so much better than the content I did back then.
Yeah,
But it's cool.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
How long have you actually had your channel? You have two channels. You have Waifu Runs and you have Waifu Runs TV. Is that what it
Yeah,
is?
and I got three, so I also have the archive channel too,
Oh,
which
yeah.
I just upload like speedruns on basically.
Right. How
So.
long has all this been going on with YouTube?
So a couple of years ago, I'm thinking it was like right as the pandemic started.
Hmm.
Um, I was Twitch streaming a lot, doing speed runs and stuff, but I wanted to find a more consistent financial stream of income with content creation. So I started my first YouTube channel then, which is the main channel that does the big video essays and
Right.
stuff. And then over the years, recently, like the last 6 months of last year, I started the archive channel and the highlight channel to basically just make more sustainable forms of content
Right.
more regularly that aren't, like 100-hour video essays.
That's funny. We're both COVID babies. My channel blew up with the pandemic as well. That's when I got
Yeah, there are
started.
lots of us,
Yeah.
so I'm not super surprised.
So that was one of my questions. I was going to ask if you started with just streaming first and then did channel, but um, before that, before streaming and everything, how did you actually get interested in the concept of speedrunning games?
Well, I mean, I just was never a super like wealthy person, so a lot of the times it stemmed from like just I get a new game like once a month or once every 2 weeks at most, and it was from the bargain bin. So it's like you got to make a good choice, and I
And
just would play it over and over and over
yeah, that's
again,
your
and
game. That's the game
yeah,
you have, and that's the one you're going to master.
yeah, exactly. So it kind of bred this mindset of like, especially like, oh, I don't have a memory card because I got a new console and now, that's like the same price of a game. So do I get a new game or do I get a memory card? And so oftentimes I'd choose just get a new game and I'd just play the game over and over and over again, try to beat the game in one sitting just so I could see the end game content and whatnot, leaving the console on for days on end and all
And,
sorts of stuff
and
like
were you
that.
trying to beat games as quickly as possible before you even knew that speedrunning was like a thing that people did?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. It wasn't the goal wasn't to beat the game fast. It was just like I want to see all of the content, but I don't have a memory card. You know what I mean? And so my mom figured out that I was leaving the console on, so I need to get through the early game content fast enough to actually be able to beat the game and stuff like that. And that just kind of bred like okay, well, for me, the point of games is to be able to get through the content, and to do that, I need to understand the mechanics really well and stuff. So I became a big fan of like just mastering the mechanics and stuff like that, way, way, way before I even knew what speedrunning was.
That's great. I mean, replayability was such an important aspect of game design. I mean, going back to like the old like Nintendo titles or Sega titles, like games might be a 2 to 3 hour experience, but there was so much replayability, and then you just kept playing them over and over and over again. And these days, it seems like people evaluate the value of a game based on how much content there is before you beat it once.
Yeah,
Like people want a
yeah, definitely.
60 hour experience when I mean that's great. I'm glad that those are out there, but sometimes I just want a solid 8 hour campaign with like six difficulty modes and unlockables and
Yeah,
challenges that I can just keep playing and mastering. Because when you
yeah,
play
that's
something for
exactly
60
how I feel
hours,
too.
it's not like you're mastering it when you after
Yeah.
60 hours.
Yeah, see, I have a unique perspective on this. I kind of felt this way before I started speedrunning, but definitely it solidified itself after I started speedrunning. And that's the like I always felt the unique selling point of video games as a medium is that they have mechanics,
Hmm.
right? Like any other piece of art doesn't have mechanics, right? Like books don't have mechanics or movies
Right.
don't have mechanics, right? They're essentially pseudo sports.
Yeah.
Like
They're
you
yeah.
invent all of the physics and mechanics interactions in like this miniature sport, right? And so like for me, the point of video games was to build mastery over this little sport domain. And
Mm.
like replaying the game and the better you get at the game, the more fun the game becomes and all that sorts of things. It's just kind of been the point for me, at least with video games. I mean, I guess it's retroactively built out of not being able to consume as much as other people potentially,
Sure.
but I also see it as like, that is the unique selling point of the medium. So I think that that should maybe be the focal point for a lot of the medium, right? Like it's like you wouldn't make a movie and not care at all about cinematography
Mm.
or write a book and not care at all about the writing. So that's one of those big gripes I have is when people make video games and they don't care at all about the gameplay.
Yeah,
This,
that seems to be something that happens more and more as the generations go on as well, because it's like they can get away with it.
yeah, well, because I think that most people don't engage with video games in that pseudo sport way,
Hmm.
unless it's like an esport or a competitive FPS or something
Yeah,
like that. And those they kind of see those as two different things. Where if it's this PvE experience, it's an experience, right? It's like a movie,
yeah,
and that's why you get these movie games like Last of Us or New God of War or whatever, where it's these cinematic experiences that are meant to be like engaged with, consumed once and then move on. But that's never
yeah.
what I liked about the video games in general.
I can see the appeal though. Like I don't want to
Certainly,
judge anyone for playing that way. I'm sure you don't either, because I totally understand the perspective of someone who's like, hey man, I work 11 hours a day, and I take the subway home, and I come home, and I'm not looking for a super sweaty single player challenge to stress me out. I just want to kind of experience a world and maybe have some combat and run around and collect items for
certainly.
side quests. And I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, I totally get that. It starts to feel more and more like what some of us want out of those out of our experiences feels more and more relegated to either like super specific types of games or just the indie scene.
yeah, basically. I totally agree. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to play like a cinematic experience
No,
or
of
whatever.
course not.
Right. But it's just one of those things where it's like, man, to me, video games is not that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, well, when I think of video games, it's like not what I immediately think of. And that's fine. But yeah, I totally agree. It seems like, they've kind of narrowed it down to be like, okay, you got like the boomer shooters and like the esports
Hmm.
and, like the precision platformers. And those are like the video gamey ass video games, as someone like Gaming Brit would say. Right. Like,
Hmm.
and those are the genres where that stuff's kind of nailed down, or just the indie scene in general.
Yeah. But then we also have our other big AAA budget games like like the Souls games, or
Yeah.
even something like a Devil May Cry 5 or a Resident Evil 4, right? That just came
Yeah.
out, is something that delivers a game that really it really delivers on the concept that I always talk about on my channel, which is player accountability. That it wants you to play the game, and it doesn't want you to immediately go looking for some dumb easy bullshit right away. It's not that there isn't some bullshit in there. There's always
Yeah.
bullshit, right? But
Yeah.
for the vast majority of people who pick it up, like they're gonna have to learn how to play the game to get through it, and it's not focused on the cinematic experience. It's there, but you really got to learn how to play it, and it never lets up. And I think that's one of the reasons a month later I'm still playing it.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. Honestly, like I like how a lot of these games reach that sort of middle ground. Like some of my favorite games have that kind of middle ground.
Hmm.
Like while Devil May Cry 3 is my favorite game of all time and it's mechanical masterpiece, it still has some phenomenal presentation. Like the
Hmm.
cutscenes are great, like it's an enjoyable experience to just play through. And I see that with stuff like Resident Evil 4 Remake and Dead Space Remake and all
Yeah,
these games where they can, match some quality presentation and an engaging experience with like, an actual video game underneath the hood.
and
You know
with
that
replayability too.
Yeah.
Like that,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
going back to the first Resident Evil, just the first Resident Evil, beating it in less than 3 hours got you the rocket launcher. They
Yep.
wanted you to replay it and learn it and master the survival horror genre that they were pioneering. And it's been going like that through pretty much all the other Resident Evil since, and Resident Evil 4 Remake continues that, and it's a great feeling.
Yeah, I love that continuation. It's super cool. It makes it feel like okay, like they still want, this classic video game feel. Like it's still a video game. Like I was very afraid that, I play RE4 Remake and I'm like, oh, it's like there's like Last of Us in it. Like I'm walking behind Ashley and I can't move and I can't fast forward and we're walking for 10 minutes while she does some exposition or something.
Oh God, that is...
But like, there's nothing like that in the game. There's like one section at the end where you walk for like 2 minutes holding Ashley, and that groaned so hard when that happened. But I was like, it's one section. Like this could have been so much worse.
I forgot to mention that part in my review. Something like that makes me so upset. I forgot to mention it because I completely wiped it out of my memory.
Because the rest of the game is so good. Yeah, you play for like 13 and a half hours and you get to this point and you're like, oh, this 2 minutes sucks.
Yeah, it sucks.
Like, it's 2 minutes, right?
It is only once, but man, it's not good. But but that whole trend that you talk about, of the whole like walking as someone is talking for the next few minutes, I don't understand it. I don't understand the appeal of that kind of like exposition over just like a well-directed cutscene that you could skip on a replay. I don't see the appeal. Like even the Dead Space remake, I think is phenomenal, but it keeps that old like they call into you and like, okay, fine, keep it, but give a skip option. Or when you go down and you talk to what's his name, Hammond. You go down and you talk to Hammond in Chapter 4, and you just standing there on the bridge
for like 3 minutes. You just talk.
There's nothing to look at. Like there's no cinematography to even appreciate the drama. You're just like flipping the mouse around.
Well, I think
how is that immersive?
I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit pessimistic, but I think that it's just twofold. It's easier, right?
Oh, of course it is.
It requires less resources to produce, and two, like 99% of the audience won't care because 99% of the audience only plays the game once, because that's what most audiences do, right? Unless it's like a specific game where the culture around the game is okay, you play it a lot, like RE4 Remake or Devil May Cry or something, then you can just get away with stuff like that because people will just play it at once and they'll be like, oh, well, maybe that wasn't the most enjoyable thing, but I was, sipping my coffee when I did that or whatever.
Yeah, it's a quality of life thing. It's much worse on the replay, right? And not just speedrunning, but like I don't speedrun. I've speedrun a handful of games. I speedrun RE1 Remake. I did Spelunky. Here and there, I dabble in it. But I just like to be like, okay, let's raise the difficulty, or hey, maybe I'll play, but I'm not going to use this weapon. I like that. And every time you run into those problems, and they get worse and worse and worse. And the only reason it didn't start really pissing me off in Dead Space is because I didn't stick with Dead Space because there's no zealot difficulty.
Yeah.
And it's just
you just want to play hardcore over and over again.
Yeah, so. Like the hardest difficulty of Dead Space was probably hard for people who had never played Dead Space before. But
it was easier for sure.
Yeah, it's been a series for 15 years, and a lot of people are going to be playing this as veterans, and it doesn't even offer what Dead Space 2 offered in terms of difficulty, which I would have stuck with it a lot longer if it had, I think.
For sure. I think me too. One of the things, especially with that game, it's just, the replayability just drags. And it's just a trend that happens. And I get it. I mean, the presentation is the most important factor because most people aren't even going to play the game all the way through. Like if you look at achievement lists for like percentages of people that bought the game, like you look at like halfway point, like beat chapter 10 out of 15 or something. I know it's 2/3, but you get my point. At like, it's like less than 50% of people that own the game have beat the 10th chapter or whatever. And it's like, well, at that point, why even bother as a developer to try to make the game more replayable? You should just focus on the presentation on the first playthrough at all costs, because you just want people to play it long enough to justify, not even getting past the 2-hour mark so they don't refund it at the very least. Yeah. And at most, like playing it for long enough that they can even recommend it to someone else.
How do you view the completion records for that kind of stuff? Because now you have me curious about Resident Evil 4, because what you said is true of most games. Most people don't finish the games they get. We're lucky if they get halfway through. But I don't
You
know.
can just look it up on like Steam Achievement Tracker and stuff.
Yeah.
Like they have websites dedicated to it. Just check like every Steam account ever, basically,
Yeah.
and all of the Steam accounts that have the game versus what achievements they have and stuff.
I mean, it's
It's
an
kind of crazy to
18-hour
look at stuff like
game.
that. Yeah,
So I wouldn't be surprised if, what, 20%?
a lot of people didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people just never finished it. I mean, and it's crazy too because that's like a universally like this is a great game.
Uh-huh.
So like it just happens. I mean, people get busy and stuff, right? So it makes sense, and I understand that. Not every experience is going to be made for the turbo nerd like myself. Who's going to put like 1,000 hours into it and he's going to master all the mechanics and be able to beat it, blindfolded or some shit. Like, and that's totally fine. But I would wish that more games did focus on making. Like I miss that like early Nintendo like insanely snappy like tight controls. Like dude, because it just makes the game better. Like even casual players enjoy that more. Like just having like really tight controls and good gameplay mechanics like that. Even if they don't even consciously know like this is like a big part of it. That's the stuff that, in my personal opinion, that's what makes like legendary games that are gonna stick around, stand the test of time. Like having these just super tight, near flawless experiences and stuff.
One thing that I've really enjoyed about watching your videos, at least recently, is that you really stick to your opinions and you don't say them in like an apologizing way. We just mentioned the walking section of RE4 Remake, and I was watching your video on all the skips and everything, and you somewhere in your video you're just like, near the end of the game there's this terrible walking section. There's like the game forgets what it is and thinks it's The Last of Us. It's terrible and everyone hates it. and I was like, man, this guy just got my respect. He doesn't say, some people, this is a controversial section that some people might not like, but I can see why. No. You just said this is crap. And if you disagree, then leave me a comment, whatever. And you move on. I really like that about your style.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I just, I have my opinions and I have thought about them a lot. And I have reasons for them and I can rant all day and justify them, blah, blah, blah. And, maybe I'm wrong. And if I am wrong, I'm willing to discuss it and, have a conversation about it and figure it out. But I don't know, especially when it comes to stuff like that, I'm just like, bro, literally who asked for this? To be like, you're just walking with Ashley in your arms for 2.5 minutes. Like,
yeah.
Especially as a speedrunner, I have the unique perspective of everything that's annoying about the game is 1,000 times more annoying to me specifically because I play it 1,000 times more than anyone else. So, the stuff that might not bother someone very much because they only played it a couple times, that might just be like actually the worst part of the game if you're me. A good example is the movement in RE4 Remake or like the bloom on the accuracy. Like it's super small stuff that, I will admit 99.9% of the players will not bother or care at all about. But to me, I'm just like, I'm trying to get out of the merchant room and I run into a wall for 3 seconds because the Leon's movement is awful. And I'm just like, and this is the video game we got in 2023.
Dude, the pistol challenges, like trying to hit something moving super fast in the background.
Oh yeah!
Oh, what a nightmare! I just stopped.
That was crazy to me because the shooting gallery is, I'm assuming what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
The shooting gallery with the orangey bloom on the aim. To me, that blew my mind because I was like 10 hours into my first playthrough, and I hadn't used a single laser sight the whole game. I'd been using the Red 9, and I had missed a couple shots, but I was just like, whatever, maybe skill issue or something. And then I played the shooting gallery, and I was like, oh no. Wait, actually, the game is terrible. It wasn't my fault. Like, actually, just this aiming mechanic is awful, and I had no idea until the game required you to like actually use it precisely.
Yeah.
And on a timer, and I was like, whoa, they like could have totally gotten away with it, but then they intentionally added in a thing in the game that most people are going to want to try to do that will just show them how bad the aiming mechanic
it just
is.
Showcases the issues with it. And yeah, mostly at long range, but like trying to make a precision shot with a pistol at long range without like sitting there and waiting for it to zoom in is like and even then like,
it could still miss.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, of course, it's like not actually a big deal. Like I don't actually think the game's terrible because but it's one of those things where it's like, man, that seems like it's really easy to not do. yet here we are. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. And to me, I have this whole rant that I do on my stream sometimes where I'm like, the original director of the original RE4 sat everyone aside and was like, look, let's not care about presentation. Let's just nail the gameplay mechanics. Let's make this like super fun, and just like ultra consistent or whatever. And then that's what they did. And that's like, in my opinion, why RE4 OG is like one of the best games ever made. It's got like this insanely tight control scheme and like super fun and innovative gameplay mechanics and stuff. Uh, and then in the remake, they're like, okay, we have the perfect opportunity to add on to this already classic experience. And so like, what do we do? And like, one of the things they do is like, okay, let's completely sacrifice the movement and aiming mechanics for presentation. And I'm like, isn't that exactly the opposite of what they did with the original? So like, I have this. To me, honestly, it's like, while Dead Space Remake and RE4 Remake are both phenomenal games, I almost feel like Dead Space Remake is like a better remake, depending on like the way you want to define what makes a good remake, of course, because it has like the spirit. It follows like exactly what the original like vision was, but it just tends to increase that. Whereas I feel like RE4 Remake almost has like, okay, like the original's great, but we're gonna like do something else, which is
Sure.
cool. You know what I mean? Which is cool, and the game is phenomenal. Obviously, I wouldn't say that it's not, but it's kind of conflicting because I almost felt the opposite with like RE3 Remake, where I really love the game because it does something different than the original. Because I'm not a big fan of the original, but a lot of fans were like, "Oh, like I wanted it to be like the original." You know what I mean? And so when it's not, they get upset. But I'm almost on the opposite side of that now with RE4 Remake, where I'm like, man, if only it was a little bit more faithful. You know what I mean? But I was hearkening on the RE3 Remake, like, just make it even less faithful. Like, fuck it. Just keep going. You know what I mean? Like, do your own thing. Because personally, I just wasn't a big fan of the original.
That's fascinating to me. Okay, it's definitely RE3 Remake is definitely a controversial title in the
Yes, of course.
in the world of that. I've made my feelings about it crystal clear, but it does your perspective on it come more from your speedrunning side of things?
Just more from just the gameplay and mechanics side of things. Like I'm not a fan of like any of the original RE games because to me it's just like a walking simulator. Like 90% of the gameplay, even in like RE2 Remake, I'm not a fan because 90% of the gameplay is just okay, I'm walking from point A to point B, and there is an enemy in the way. And the gameplay mechanics, like the combat mechanics, are not sophisticated enough to make the combat really that fun. It's more about resource management stuff, which is cool, but I much prefer something more like RE4, where you have the resource management aspect, but the combat is fun enough in it itself where you can play like mercenaries. And it's
So
like
you're not so
time.
much of a survival horror guy. You're more of the action horror side of things.
Oh, definitely. Okay. Honestly, I'm not even a fan of horror games in general. Like Dead Space is one of my favorite games, but I like it specifically because of the gameplay mechanics. Like Dead Space 2 is one of the tightest third-person shooters ever. Like the combat in that game is so fun, and that's why it's one of my favorite games. Like the horror elements, I could totally take it or leave it. I like the survival aspect of it because the resource management is fun, but primarily due to the gameplay elements. I'm not really a huge like horror kind of guy.
That's interesting to me because what I love so much about RE3 original is, I mean, one is the Nemesis system, the way Nemesis interacts with you, and also, I wouldn't call RE3 of the originals. I definitely wouldn't call RE3 like just like moving from point A to point B with enemies in front of you, because half the game is figuring out where to go, because that's a big difference. Like when you're just following the linear path, that's one thing, but when you're in a big sprawling city and you've got 4 different puzzle items and you have to remember that you need to take this thing back to this other place you used to be at, and you're looking at studying a big map, that's a big part of the experience, in addition to things like resource management and combat and stuff like that. And I think that's one of the big things that people reacted badly to
I definitely could agree with that for sure. From my perspective, though, I always just thought like, the puzzles aren't very sophisticated. I usually figured that out pretty quickly. It's like, oh, I have a crank and there's a crank hole that I saw earlier. Now I just go back. It's not like I really had to figure it out per se, at least in most instances. There were definitely a couple spots in those games where I'm like, okay, what do I got to do now? Like I got to think about it or whatever,
Hmm.
right? But to me, I'm like, okay, if I want a puzzle game, I'm not going to play RE4, for instance, like where the puzzle solution is 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. You know what I mean? You could like install Factorio or like
Yeah.
play a fucking crossword puzzle. Something that'll actually give me some sort of
Well then,
like challenge in the puzzle elements.
how do you feel about the increased presence of puzzles in the RE4 remake?
I honestly hate it because even still, the puzzles are really easy. It just feels like padding to me. I'm like, oh man, I never walked out of Waterhall in OGRE4 and it was like, man, that combat was too much fun. I need to now stop doing combat and go solve a puzzle. That
Oh
would definitely
man.
make the pacing much better.
And
You
this
know what I
interview
mean?
is over. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. No,
No, and I mean, like, that's obviously not a perspective that everyone shares. But,
right.
like, could you imagine if you're playing Doom Eternal and it's like, okay, now it's time for a puzzle?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, hell, I mean, some people would say that they did that with the platforming sections if they weren't able to get through them the first time.
And the platforming was the worst part of the game, so there we go.
But I will hold this point till the day I die. The platforming puzzles, especially in the opening levels, are passed by aerial types of movement that by learning them you will maneuver better in arena combat. It's a it's a Karate Kid sort of method where they make you do something and you're like, why am I doing this? And then you find yourself doing it automatically in fights because you did it to get through the platforming puzzle. So people can hate them all they want. They got better from them.
I would totally agree with that. Certainly. Yeah, I mean, I agree. But I think that is like a really good use of interacting, like introducing new gameplay mechanics like that. Whereas something like Resident Evil, like, okay, like it's just a completely different game. Like you're shooting your way through Waterhall and then you're like, okay, now I'm doing a puzzle.
Yeah. Oh,
and
you would
like
hate
the
Silent
puzzle
Hill.
doesn't. Oh, I mean, I am not a huge fan of Silent Hill.
Okay.
But like, I appreciate that because it at least tries to do something unique with the presentation of video games instead of just like telling like this narrative story like at you. It kind of feels like you're more involved. At least that's how I felt with Silent Hill. But yeah, when it comes to like Resident Evil puzzles, unlike Doom Eternal's platforming puzzles, it doesn't really teach you anything about the rest of the games. Yeah, it's just kind of like a different thing.
Yeah.
And like some people are gonna love that, some people aren't. And that's totally fine. But I'm the type of person where I wish every game was Doom Eternal and Devil May Cry.
Okay.
So it's like, I mean, not every game obviously, but every game that I want to play.
Yeah. You want to get to the action and you want a minimal amount of nonsense in between.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And
honestly, like, and the more I play games, the more I feel that way. Like, especially with speedrunning, I've gotten very like, okay, I'm done with this now. Like even with RE4 Remake, like I love the combat, I love the gameplay sections and stuff, but there's like definitely some times where it's like, okay, you do one interesting combat room and then now you're walking for 10 minutes until you get to the next interesting combat room. And like that's just how it boils down, it's like nothing wrong with that per se, but my monkey brain is like, okay, need to do like 6,000 APMs or whatever, and if I'm just holding W for a little bit, I get bored. So that's totally fine, which is why I've gravitated more towards like speedruns like Doom Eternal or like Left 4 Dead 2 or all these other interesting like super high APM type things.
Yeah, that you're always doing something. There's always something interesting going on.
Yeah, and there's always consequence too, like at all times, which is exhausting, I'm sure. Like if you're just like trying to play the game like just for fun or whatever, like not everyone's gonna want that experience all the time,
Sure.
So you want to just like, make another portal in Minecraft or something, like just relax and chill.
Do you, when you have a new game in your hands, let's say it's not even like in a genre that you're really familiar with. Let's say you're just playing a new game. Do you have a hard time getting out of your speedrunning perspective, or do you try to meet a new game on its own terms and save all that for later?
So I think that's actually like there's got a lot more to that question than you might think, because I've thought a lot about this and I thought a lot about the psychology of like how people play games and stuff. I'm a big fan of what's his name now? I can't remember it, but I'm sure you've watched his videos. The dude that does all like the psychology based game analysis stuff. Yeah, I can't remember it. Maybe I'll look it up later. But
as well.
yeah, but just it's when you play a video game, you are naturally looking for optimal solutions to every problem that you're solving because
Mm-hmm.
that's how you interact with games. And so speedrunning is just doing that, but being a super tryhard. So like essentially you're just playing the game, but you're taking way more consideration to every single possible mechanic, and you're like using a different lens to view the game. Like instead of just trying to beat it, you're trying to beat it quickly, right? So you know that recontextualizes the way you interact with everything in the game, essentially. But I can definitely disconnect from that and just be like, I'm just going to enjoy the game.
That's good.
But it's really not. I mean, not everyone can. A lot of people that like pick up speedruns, like once they know how to speedrun the game, they can never play that game again normally or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
It
but
can do it.
yeah, a lot of people are like that. I'm personally not like that, but I think that's because even when I played games normally, I just was always very focused on like the optimization of whatever gameplay mechanic I'm doing, right? Like if it's kind of how you just play games normally is to optimize it, right? It's an optimization problem. Like how do I best solve whatever problems ahead of me in this game? And it's thinking about it more makes it a speed run essentially. So it's kind of like yes and no, right? Like you kind of do use that speedrunner brain when you're just playing a game, even normally for the first time, just because that's just what it is. It's a natural extension of your normal thought process when playing a game.
That's,
But just the degree of like how much do I want to be a nerd about it? Like am I gonna sit down and make a spreadsheet to figure this out, or am I just gonna play the game?
right.
Right. And I can just choose to just play the game. Like even sometimes when I speedrun, I'll do that. Like I'll know, okay, well this probably isn't the most optimal, but like I'm having fun and I
Mm-hmm.
don't really want to lab it out right now. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna continue to do what I'm doing. Right.
It's funny that you mentioned the psychology of this, and that a new player will go into a game and they're looking for the most optimal solution, and that plays into a lot of discussions about balance, and especially how you balance a game for a new player as they're trying to learn it. Because what you just said to me, that a player will gravitate towards the most optimal solution. That's the opposite that I hear almost on a daily basis from people who disagree with my criticisms of like style meter based games,
Hmm.
like a Devil May Cry 5, or infamously on my channel the whole Ultra Kill situation, where I say, hey, if you go into this game and I'm just doing this one thing, and this one thing seems to be working just fine, I don't even have to learn what I'm doing. Um, I'm told that's a me problem, because people go into games looking to quote have fun, and
It's not true at all.
it's
Yeah,
not
like
it's not.
if you do the actual psychological research, it's not true at all.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the optimal way to create a game, and from my imagining, would be that you make an experience that is fun to optimize.
Yeah.
Like learning how to play the game and learning how to overcome the challenge in and of itself is fun.
Yeah,
Like,
that's a good way
and
to put it.
however, yeah,
That was
I
a,
found the channel. It's Daryl Talks Games, by the way.
oh, okay.
Who is the guy that does a bunch of he does like this really cool stuff where he talks about games and does a bunch of psychological research attached to it. It's very very cool stuff.
That's cool. Let's see. I wanted to get. I wanted you to talk a little bit about DA. Could you explain
Mm,
what DA is? And
okay.
I want you to tell me how you accidentally used it on the Del Lago fight.
Mhm.
And do you see more instances of DA being implemented into the speedrun route?
Okay, so DA stands for difficulty adjustment, which is a system that the game does with internal. This is actually like falls right into like the psychological aspect too. This is very, very good segue. So yeah, the game basically has an internal system. Lots of games do, but specifically in this instance, sorry for Remake, where it tracks how well you're doing by tracking a multitude of factors like how much damage you're taking and how many shots you've missed or how many enemies you're killed or how many resources you have in your inventory. And it tweaks variables of the game um, in response to that. So let's say you die a bunch in one level, then the next level will be easier. And let's say you're playing super well through the game and you haven't gotten hit in a super long time. then the game gets harder. And that's basically a mechanical system that has existed even since OGRE4. Like that is like one of the first games that really popularized the DA system or dynamic difficulty system, way back in like 2005. And it's the really, really interesting thing about DA is it is a phenomenally like super intelligent way to balance games for the casual player so that they can have optimal enjoyment. They always stay in that realm of proximal development.
Even
They
on
stay
replays.
right where the game is perfect.
Even on replays, I find, you know.
Yeah. But the problem is, as soon as you know it exists, for a lot of people, it completely ruins the experience because you know that you're being punished for playing better. So you're like, why even play better? Because legit in some circumstances, like, oh, like I don't have enough resources for this boss fight. Well, I guess I could just die a bunch of times. And then when I do the boss fight, then it gets easier. Or even more common case is I'm dying over and over again trying to beat this boss, and the game robs me of the achievement of beating the boss on its actual difficulty by making it easier for me.
By changing the difficulty for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like you're playing Devil May Cry 3 and you're fighting Agni and Rudra for the first time, and you die 6 times, but after the first time you died, they get knocked back in 1 parry instead of 2, making the fight infinitely easier. And it's like, as soon as you notice that, if you're like someone who really likes a challenge or, you know, wants to overcome the game, like that is just like completely undermines the victory for a lot of people.
Do you think that maybe the future games implementing this should just have an option that prompts the player? Would you like this game to be balanced on, or maybe after the first time you beat it, you can choose to disable DA?
Well,
because I feel like you have to have a game completely rebalanced to consider not having it.
Yeah, no, definitely you do, and I think that it makes it a lot harder to balance the game for a wider possible audience when you don't have it, right? Like, because, you know, even if you're Devil May Cry and you have 6 difficulty modes, it's like, you know, there's going to be people that like land right dead in the middle between easy and normal. You know what I mean? And if they're playing easy and it's too easy because it doesn't scale up to them, or they're playing normal and it's too hard because it doesn't scale down, then they're not going to have an enjoyable time on either difficulty. And what I have found to be the most elegant solution is that you can have difficulty adjustment on the medium and easier difficulties, but then on the hardest difficulty, you have to remove it. Because if the people who are going to be playing the harder difficulty are going to be usually people that, you know, you can't unlock it on the first playthrough for a lot of games. So they're already played the game more than once. They know what's to come, which, you know, by itself makes the game infinitely more approachable. And then also, that's the people that are going to be wanting the highest level of challenge. So they're also the people that are going to be the most negatively affected by, you know, being cheated out of an accomplishment or whatever, right? I would also argue it's probably those people that are also the most likely to know it exists because they probably know more about games if they're playing more often on higher difficulties, for example.
Okay, that's a fair point.
But it's a really weird catch-22 because as a dev, it's a phenomenal solution, right? Like, it's just been ruined by the internet. Like, the fact that people know it exists is like one of the things that makes it not work as well, right? Like, once you know what's in the secret sauce, then it's not so secret anymore, you know, and it has a lot of negative psychological consequences, I think. But I think overall, probably, it's like, doesn't matter. They'll probably just keep doing it.
You think that maybe it just needs to be more, you know, refined and into getting it to be as little of a negative experience on the knowledgeable players as possible?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like for Remake, for example, the DA is not that big a deal. Like it doesn't really, even in speedruns, like trying to manipulate it, it's like so small, it's barely noticeable. But at that point, it's like, okay, if it's barely noticeable, then what was the point of making the system in the first place?
Well,
right.
I'd say that even for someone like me, I've played through hardcore and then professional, and then I just go back to playing hardcore basically, and like I know what I'm doing and I can play pretty well, but I'm still finding myself in positions where I'm like, damn it, I don't have any shotgun shells, or, you know, like I still find myself there. So so to whatever degree they have it tuned, it's still doing its job for someone like me. I'm not just running around with, you know, 400 submachine gun rounds all the time.
Yeah, and I
Like,
think that they've gotten way better with it.
yeah.
For sure. Like, definitely in RE4 Remake, it's like the best iteration I've seen of it in a while.
Okay.
But like, I'll give you a counter example. RE2 Remake,
Hmm.
that game has a really aggressive difficulty adjustment system, and the primary thing that makes the game harder is picking up items. So actually, the more you explore, the more you're punished, and the items don't really offset the amount the game punishes you for exploring. So like, if you're playing on standard and you skip past like every optional item in the entire game, by the time you get to the labs, zombies stop staggering in one headshot. It becomes random, and sometimes it's like 2 or 3, right? But if you just like collect everything you can in the RPD, before you leave the RPD, enemies are stopped staggering in 2 to 3 headshots.
Huh.
Which, like, if you're just trying to clear out the area, right, and you don't want to kill everything, you just like want to stun stuff and run past, makes the game like infinitely more brutal. And
Is
so
that
it's-
not is that okay? I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. Is that not fair? I mean, I'm saying if you're trying to play the game that way, then is it not fair for them to try to ramp up the difficulty and punish you for it?
Well, my thought process was that the entire point for a lot of people for Resident Evil games is to like explore everything and collect everything and like gather
Totally.
your resources. But the game actually like super counterproductively punishes you for doing so. It's like actually the optimal strategy is to just not pick up anything and walk to the end.
If you know that the system is there to be exploited.
Yeah, exactly. But I
Right.
mean, you know, with the internet, the knowledge becomes public and spreads really fast. Like just look at like the glitches and skips and stuff in RE4 Remake. Like
Yeah.
everyone knows those exist. You know, and it's only been a month. Right?
Yeah, that's a fair point. This is such an interesting discussion. I've had speedrunners on, but like dedicated speedruns from like a single game. I haven't had anyone on that just like covers this overall. So I've been.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying because yeah, I mean, this is like what I live for. This is the stuff I love to talk about because I'm
Yeah.
a big old nerd. So
I figured you would enjoy the discussion. Let's see what else I have on my list to get to. Let's see.
yeah, as far as the DA thing though, like I do think that like the amount of people at the moment that currently know it exists, even in the casual way, is like not enough to where like developers will even care.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, because we're looking at millions of people playing the game.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
looking at a couple 100,000 people that maybe know about it, and then fewer than that
that even like could actually
affecting
in some sort of exactly.
Yeah.
And that's something I try to keep into perspective when I'm like having conversations like this is like, look, we're a bunch of nerds. Like this is like hyper nerd shit. Like things that we complain about, probably 99% of the general audience of these games will just never even interact with whatsoever.
Yeah, and
that's totally fine.
And when you complain about it, like it's impossible for the casual audience to sympathize with you.
Yeah.
Like I learned that in my Village review, and I have a 40-minute review of Village, and somewhere in the beginning I'm talking about the intro, that slow ass intro where you're walking through the snow.
You literally carry a baby through the snow for like
God.
8 minutes. It's so bad.
Oh
dude.
God! And I said in the video that I was like, I feel really bad for anyone who's gonna be speedrunning this game. Please, guys, just like start the speedrun at the first save spot or something. Like don't
That's exactly what we ended up doing.
Don't
by
put
the
yourself
way.
through this. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. And I got so many comments of people saying like, you games should not be designed and balanced around speedrunning. And I'm like, it was a 30-second comment in a 40-minute video, just saying that I felt bad for people replaying the game and speedrunning it. Like, and hell, I mean, Resident Evil, like you talk about the 2-minute Last of Us sequence in RE4 being bad.
Yeah.
Those long ass intros are way worse because you have to restart the game so many times, and you got to walk through the snow. Fuck that.
Yeah, exactly. And like, yeah, I don't expect people who are just trying to play the game casually or whatever to be able to sympathize with that. But it is one of those things where it's just like the more you play the game, the more it's gonna just be negative consequences towards you specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. I was watching your videos last night, and you kind of prepping for this, and I have to ask, why no aim zoom mod?
Because I just try to keep the game as vanilla as possible.
Okay.
you can't use mods when speedrunning,
I
and
thought
it's
that
like,
might be a factor, that maybe you
yeah, and if I'm
couldn't do
doing a
that.
challenge run or something, it's like, well, I just want to make it as vanilla as possible, just so that I'm actually wrote like a 40-minute video today about a bunch of stuff related to like patches and whatnot because they just patched all the cool speedrun tech on RE4 Remake,
They
and there's a
did?
lot of discussion about it. Yeah.
What
Um,
the sniper skip
yep.
thing? Is that
Yeah.
gone?
Yep.
Oh shit. Okay, so is there going to be pre-patch categories for this?
Yeah. Yeah. So like basically the whole video is about like everyone's freaking out because a lot more people are involved in speedrunning nowadays.
Yeah.
But like since the dawn of time, everyone speedruns on down patch, so it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, but the thing that really sucks about it is that it just kills accessibility because this is exactly what I was tying into basically is that every layer of obfuscation that you add to whatever you're doing, the less immediately understandable it is for anyone else that's like watching.
Hmm.
So like speedrunning the game, like that's already like different than a normal playthrough. So some people automatically disqualified, like they're not going to understand what's going on. At least it's going to take them a little bit to understand with some explanation or something, like what the whole point is, right? And then on top of that, it's like let's say you like add a mod. It's like okay, well now you're adding another layer, and so that makes, especially for
Down
me, like as a content creator,
patching.
yeah, and then down patching, and then console players can't down patch, so console is just completely boned when it comes to being competitive in any sort of way like that. And then yeah, and every time you add a layer of obfuscation, it becomes less immediately accessible and understandable, and
Yeah.
that hurts the greater scene basically, which is what that big video that I wrote today was about. But yeah, I think that's why I don't use mods, right? It's because I'm trying to eliminate as much obfuscation as possible to make it as immediately recognizable and understandable as you possibly can. And do you see this a lot? It's actually kind of this example that I saw of because I was watching some Minecraft YouTubers before we started, but like why all the biggest Minecraft YouTubers don't use texture packs or shaders.
Yeah.
It's like
It's
because
just
it
vanilla.
changes the way the game looks. And so it's obviously less immediately understandable. And there's this, even if it's just a tiny little change, like it, can make it less immediately understandable for some people, and that is going to limit the potential audience.
Is all the out of bounds stuff gone? Like when you blow up the anti-aircraft gun in the mic section, and then
Yep.
that's gone? Because
Yep.
that was brilliant.
Yeah.
Using the auto save there, that was so good. And now
So
that's
smart.
gone.
That skip is awesome. I mean, it's gone, quotation marks. I mean, every speedrun ever is done on down patch.
Right.
So like it doesn't affect speedrunning at all, really. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to make the videos. Like, okay, like everyone's freaking out. Like, look, guys, Super Mario 64 is speedrun on an old version of the game. You know what I mean? BLJs were patched like 20 years ago. Like this is it's
Yeah,
like it doesn't matter, right? Like everyone's just gonna play down patch. And I just it's one of those things where I used to be really bitter about it, but now I'm just like, man, look, just do whatever you want. Like if you want to patch it, patch it. I mean, nothing we could do, so no reason to get upset about it.
What aside from things getting patched out and all that, what are some of the common frustrations that you come across in speedrunning in general?
Just like when you like we were talking about before, we like to push games, like to try to like master them, master the mechanics and stuff. And a lot of games are just not meant to be played that way, even if they are like super tight mechanically. Like the better you get at a game, the more you realize like how this thing is held together with glue and duct tape. Like there are some games like the original Devil May Cry, for instance, where I had world record in every single category at once in that game. So I was specifically the most qualified person to tell you that holy shit, the lock-on mechanics in that game are terrible.
Okay.
Like you play them casually, it's fine. Even if you speedrun it, it's fine until you get like to the really, really highest level, and then the mechanics just implode. Like, and that just happens for every game because they're not, unless it's a competitive esport, like they're not expecting anyone to pour 1,000 hours into the game and just like actually make like hope and pray that the mechanics are consistent or reliable or don't have bugs or whatever. And so some games, when it comes down to it at the highest level, it's just like can be very frustrating. Like in Devil May Cry 1, for instance, there is a manual lock-on, which is phenomenal, especially for a game that came out 2001,
Yeah.
a 3D action game. But there's no lock-on reticle, so you can't tell who you're locked onto, except for where Dante's aiming at, which is fine. But the lock-on is based on proximity sometimes, and there's no reticle, so you can't tell, right? So it's totally fine. In 99% of cases, Dante shoots what you want him to shoot. Until you're playing Dante Must Die, and then you're doing the secret mission where you have to kill 3 shadows at once. And when Dante's standing on top of a skewer, he doesn't see the enemy that he's standing on top of, and instead shoots somebody else. So when you're sitting on top of a skewer out of a shadow in that game, you can shoot the shadow and get a critical hit kill, which kills it instantly, and it's way fast. But you're fighting 3 of these enemies at once inside this room, and you're praying that the auto lock-on attacks the right thing. And even sometimes when it does, if you're mashing the shoot button, Dante's aiming at the right thing, and it's standing still, but he will just shoot the floor instead, because it's a 2001 game.
Right.
So it's like, you know, no one but like me and 2 other people on the entire planet have ever experienced this and actually figured it was a problem. But because we're relying on the mechanics to be consistent and like the whole, you know, especially with DMC1, it's like, okay, you have to no damage this mission so you can get the special bonus. So you have the orbs so you can do the route. So you have to have the mechanics work right here. And if they don't, then you got to reset the whole run and you're already 20 minutes in. So now like you got to go back to the beginning of the game, you know what I mean? And like all these compounding factors. And for some games, when you break it down, like to even that level, they just are still phenomenal and like hold up perfectly. Other games, they just like crumble when you put that much pressure on them.
What titles come to mind as one that holds up?
Like Left 4 Dead 2 is a good one, where like it just so solidly constructed for the most part. That like stuff like that, you know, it's almost all skill based. You know, there's a ton of random elements in that game, obviously, but when it comes really down to it, like stuff doesn't just break, you know, most of the time. It's hard to give an example because most games do. You know, most games at the very highest level, they just kind of implode. And like that's kind of part of the fun almost because, you know, like, wow, isn't that impressive that you played the game to such a high level of precision that it imploded? And you could ask like, you know, no hit runners or other speedrunners or whatever, and they'll tell you the same thing. A lot of them, like, it comes to a point where things just boil down to if the game decides it wants to do this or not, and you know, you just have to go with it because that's just how it is, essentially.
Do you have any other titles that hold that high mark of still solid even after mastery?
Honestly, it's hard. It's easier to think of examples where they don't than when they do.
Okay, give me one where they don't. Give me a really bad case.
Okay, Doom Eternal.
Okay,
I know you love that game.
I'll accept that. For sure.
The BFG crashes the game at like half the time you shoot.
Oh yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah, or like the Dread Knight can hit you for 300 damage for no reason.
That was fixed. Well, the thing is, that kind of
speedruns you play on down patch. So.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Here, if we're judging all games wonkiness by how they perform on their 0 patch, I mean I don't know how fair that's going to be to the game as a title.
Okay, but like I mean, you know, like
speedrunning,
like that game came out 2001 and like they don't have post-launch patches, right? Like
right.
Yeah,
right.
But okay, so Doom Eternal, even on the current patch, at
Still
higher
problems.
frame rates, enemies are more aggressive and lunge from farther away and do more damage.
I don't fucking understand why games are made to have AI differences on different frame rates.
It's because people don't know how to make a tick-based system because they haven't played a Valve game.
Frustrating.
Yeah, well, and so the particularly hilarious part about Doom Eternal doing that is that they marketed the game as being perfectly playable at 1,000 frames per second.
Yeah, isn't that the irony?
Which is just completely untrue.
Like, I can't imagine fucking whiplash.
And then I love Doom Eternal.
Right, no, this is not about the game
like,
being good or bad. This is these technical aspects that get much worse, you know, once you become a speedrunner as well, or anyone playing seriously.
Yeah, or like, dude, there are some insanely like. I just want to tell you this issue. It's kind of unrelated to the mastery aspect, but the speedrunning part for Doom Eternal specifically. So You need clean, consistent 250 FPS to have more consistent bunny hops because bunny hop acceleration is random and also tied to frame rate.
Yeah.
So the higher your frames are, the more jumps you can put in, the more higher chance you get at more acceleration per landing bunny hop, right? Um, but the version that everyone speeds runs on lost NVIDIA driver support right before the 40 series cards came out. So if you are playing on an NVIDIA card and you're using a driver after that, then and you're playing on the patch that everyone speedruns on, barrels don't explode and you have insane texture flicker all the time. So the game is basically unplayable on newer NVIDIA drivers if you're playing on the old patch of the game.
No.
And because you need 250 FPS consistently, you need a really good graphics card, which means you either need an AMD graphics card or you need a late 30 series graphics card because you can't buy a 40 series because 40 series don't have graphics drivers that support 1.1. So if you're me, buy a 4080 primarily to help with Doom FPS. Figure out you can't even play Doom on 1.1 on a 4080 because the drivers don't exist to support it. Yeah, so like, fun speedrun stuff like that is pretty annoying as well.
That's oh man, yeah, you're really making me want to seriously get into speedrunning here.
Oh yeah, I'm selling it. But okay, so here's the thing though. This is one of the things I was talking about with like my video I was editing right before we started talking is like this is only stuff that happens with modern games. Like speedrunning is based primarily on nostalgia, so all of the most popular speedrunning games are games that have been out forever.
And that's the way it always will be. It always will. I mean,
Yeah.
it's always going to be Mario 64, and it's going to be you know Ocarina of Time or whatever is the most popular Zelda. Like those are always going to be up there at the top.
Yeah, exactly. Because primarily the accessibility is not an issue. Like they exist. There's never going to be patches for them. Don't have to worry about like having an insane graphics card or blah 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 or like a specific thing and XYZ. Like doesn't matter. Like they just exist. You play those and blah blah blah. And personally, brand new games speedrunning is one of my favorites because there's all this innovation and all this learning, and you get to learn these brand new systems and get to like break the game, and that's super fun. But they never have the lasting power of like the OG or like Devil May Cry or Super Mario 64 or what those will always be the kings because nostalgia is the #1 driver for what games people speedrun.
Yeah. I mean, I find myself watching the old games more than the new ones. Well, I mean, I watch a new game here and there, but like I'll throw on an RE1 speedrun or a Silent Hill 3 speedrun or hell even like an OG Doom speedrun over a modern one. Just I don't know what it is. There's just something about it, something about the culture around it, I think.
I don't know. I think it's just nostalgia because it's really interesting that you bring that up, that you'd rather watch like OG RE speedrun or like Silent Hill speedrun.
Yeah.
Even though you're a big mechanic head like me. Yeah. Because like objectively, those types of speedruns are way less mechanically interesting than let's say Doom Eternal.
Yeah.
But especially when it comes to audience size, the quality of like the competitive integrity of the speedrun has like basically nothing to do with it. It's all just nostalgia and like based on the title itself. Like Doom Eternal like doesn't have a big speedrunning scene at all, but among speedrunners, it's like hailed as like one of the greatest speedruns of all time. It's like this
pretty
insane,
awesome
impressive feat. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, like most people just Doom Eternal came out in 2019, right? So it's like hard to be nostalgic for something that came out so soon.
Well, you know what I mean, but also speaking from like the casual audience, like I see newer speedrunning audiences also gravitating towards the older speedrun titles just from a spectator or from from a playing perspective, because maybe what we like about the complex mechanics is what makes the newer games harder to become those big titles. Because if we keep with the Doom example, if you have two people, one of them is a casual speedrunner, like actual speedrunner, like learning games, and another one is a casual speedrun watcher, all right, both on the casual level, all right, and you show them, you get the one who wants to play Doom Eternal, and you get the one to watch Doom Eternal, and then you give those same two people Doom 2, which one do you think they're
Yeah.
going to understand and enjoy quicker? Right?
Yeah, and, yeah, I totally agree, and that's exactly what I was talking about like earlier.
Yeah.
Is just like that level of obfuscation. Like the harder it is to understand, the less people are going to engage with it, the less people are going to do it. You know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean those early games like SM64, OOT, stuff like this, very simple, right? That's also why a lot of the times like the less glitched categories are more popular as well. It's like there's less to learn, there's less to understand. You can just watch it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you just immediately get the point, which is awesome. I mean, that there's something definitely to be said about that. Like, it's really cool and rad.
Well, I don't really have anything else on my list of questions and topics. I do have one actually. Let me see. What are the most annoying comments you get from people about speedrunning?
Oh man,
You must
there's
get
some great
you
ones.
must get shit.
Oh, dude, that's the entire reason I made a YouTube channel. Is because I'm like, dude, can I just like, honestly, like, I mean, it was partially because I wanted to try to create some consistent finances, but also like, you know, you need a reason behind the content you make, otherwise it's not going to resonate. And the reason for me, for a lot of it was, like, dude, people need to learn about this shit. Like, I
Yes.
need to remove this obfuscation from the speedrunning scene because, like, it's really cool and it just gets shit on all the time. And like, I just want to see that end because I know as soon as people learn what the hell is going on in this video or like whatever they're watching, you know, they immediately think it's cool, like every single time. And so, you know, that's the whole point is to mitigate the YouTube comments. And I don't know, over the last like 4 years since I started doing it almost now, me and a bunch of other people in the speedrunning community have done a phenomenal job, I would say. Like the amount of like toxic speedrunners, bad, blah blah blah, like YouTube comments that I get or I see in other videos and stuff is like way less
Oh, that's
than
good.
when we started, which is really cool to see that kind of culture shift around, especially since speedrunning is so much bigger now. Because back when I started, like pre-pandemic, it was not that big at all. It's pretty niche, but now it's huge. But definitely the most annoying speedrun comment is that we're cheating
Yes.
because it completely misses the point.
Try,
Like
try actually playing the game next time
Yes,
before you call
yeah.
yourself good, like that kind of stuff.
yeah, as if, you know, spending thousands of hours to master the game's mechanics just makes us somehow not good at the game. And I always thought that the cheating analogy, I guess it is, it's like just doesn't make any sense. Like imagine you just like walk up to a bunch of people doing a 100-meter dash and you're like, you didn't actually win the race. You cheated. You stopped at 100 meters. Like, you know, me and all my friends, we do like 5K runs. That's a real run. You guys are cheating. It's like, I don't know, dude, like everyone there kind of agreed upon the same rules and are competing within those rules. That kind of seems like actually the exact opposite of what cheating is, but okay.
Yeah.
And it just, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, cheating is like, okay, look, if someone picks up a game their very first time and then does a bunch of speedrun skips and then tells everyone they beat the game, okay, fine, I get
Yeah,
I get
I can
that,
see
but
that.
but like, I've beaten the game, I've played it, I've learned to enjoy it, and now I'm speedrunning it. I don't see how that isn't valid, or even people who just get into games for the speedrunning, as long as they say that like I speedrun the game, I don't. Instead of
Yeah.
and never claim to have beaten it legitimately, okay, then fine, there should be no
Yeah.
issue.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a, and it's just so funny because it's like, like what? Like it's just, it's so dumb. Like we cheated. Yes, as like I don't know. Everyone is participating within the same rule set that is like universally agreed upon. Yet that's cheating somehow.
And it's like,
Like-
it's not like cheating. This so-called cheating is easy. It's like, this is an art. This is something you dedicate like
Yeah, exactly.
years
Like I'm
to.
cheating after I spent like 2,000 hours in this game to get this good at it or whatever.
Yeah.
And you know what it is really? It's that people. It's just that glitches are somewhat unapproachable. Like I've seen the same thing happen many times. Like people go, oh, you're cheating using glitches, blah blah blah, and like, and cheating implies that somehow makes it easier. And I'm like, okay, well, like, have you ever done the glitch? They're like, no, it seems too hard. I could never do that. I'm like, wait. I thought you just said it was cheating. Like, so if it's too hard that you can't even do it, but yet it simultaneously makes the game so easy that it's cheating, Then like, how does that work?
Well,
That doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean, it's only a one frame glitch that will crash your game if you lose, and so.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, some games, not every game is like that. You know, some games do have legit like super easy speedrun tech and stuff, and like that doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't illegitimize anything that's being done. You know, like the competition aspect is the huge part of it, right? Like you have to compete with other people. That's infinitely more difficult than doing anything by yourself. You know.
Yeah. For the few games that I've learned to speedrun, like it is no walk in the park. When you finally like you get to the end time, you're like,
yeah,
I could do better.
Yeah, always. You're like, yeah, I could do better.
Well, this has been a really cool talk. I don't know if there's anything else you want to bring up, man.
Not really. I just had fun. Thanks for having me.
You just had the Resident Evil 4 speedrun tournament, which got up to $16,000 of donations for the runners. That was fantastic. Just want to thank you for doing that. I'm not even part of the scene, and I think that's a wonderful thing to be doing for the game and for the community and just for people in general.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah, I guess I could talk a little bit about that.
Please do.
A tiny bit here too, if you want me to. But like, yeah. So that was awesome. I mean, for me, it's always been one of those things where community events are ginormous. Like, just even if it's super small scale, like doing races with friends, or you know, like a GDQ run where you're showcasing the game to a wider audience. Like, all that stuff helps to make the speedrunning community like an actual community, and not just a bunch of people that are just sweaty nerds in their basement that are doing their own thing. You know, we're a bunch of sweaty nerds in our basements doing things together, which is like way more fun. And I always love stuff like that. And specifically, I really like that events like that in particular with a big prize pool give people a lot of opportunity to actually invest real time into doing these things. Because, you know, some people have like day jobs and shit, and they're not a content creator that can do the infinite time glitch and, you know, get good at a game. A lot of the people that do speedrun just do regular 9-to-5ers or whatever and just do it in their free time for fun, which is dope.
Yeah.
But I like to be able to give opportunities to those people to, you know, win money or exposure or whatever. Because when I started, I was like broke as hell, and I had like a really shitty PC that I was streaming on that was a pre-built, and I was playing RE2 Remake, and Twitch Rivals came through and they hosted a speedrun tournament, and my PC could barely even play the game, let alone compete at the high frame rate restrictions. And I grinded my ass off, and I got third place, and that won me like $2,000, and I was able to use that $2,000 to buy a new computer. And I honestly, like, my entire content creation career I owe to that, essentially, I think, because I would not have been able to make the quality content that I needed to be able to build the audience that I have unless I was able to get that little incentive. And so I always wanted to be able to give that opportunity to other people, which is why I've thrown events like that. And it's crazy to me that it could get so big that it was like a $16,000 prize pool. I mean, I only threw like $2,500 in it on myself, and the rest was just community raised, which is really awesome to see.
What a nice genesis to your story. I didn't know that. That's a really, really cool story you got there, how you started and
well, yeah, thank you.
That's really cool to hear.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I just wanted to just give back because the community's given me so much. Like, last year I moved out. I got my own place, and I've been looking to save to buy a house in the next couple of years and stuff. And that's all stuff that I couldn't have done unless the speedrunning community gave to me what they did. So always looking to give back and do stuff for the community, and always try to give more information and make it more accessible and boost the homies, you know, because you never know. Like, it could really be like a life-changing thing for some people. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is. Who knows? But having the opportunity to do that and bring the community together for stuff like that has been the best part of like having some sort of platform, essentially. So I always look to do stuff like that when I can.
Well, you guys heard it here. Go follow WaifuRuns and help this guy buy a house.
Well, thank you. That's the plan with RE4 Remake. That was the plan. I'm like, we were like, are you going to play RE4 Remake? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to buy a house. That was the joke.
I'm only playing this game to buy a house. This game is soulless. Soulless. I wanted to ask one more question, and this is more about what it's like to on a personal level to be involved in the things you are. So on a personal note, I've noticed that for myself over the past 3 years, now that so much of my life has been kind of upturned, and now I'm super focused on this channel and YouTube stuff, and I never really was before. I mean, I've always been into things like, I was a competitive Mortal Kombat player for 5 years, and like I've always had my things that were my interests that were very different from most of my friends. But now that I'm like every day, my mind is on what am I editing, what am I thinking about, what am I creating, what games are coming out. Now that I'm so deep into this kind of world that most people couldn't even understand, I find it I found it a little harder to talk to some of my like oldest friends, because of like now there's like I don't even know how we relate to each other, because it's like we live in different worlds now. And I was wondering if it's like doubly hard for you being all super involved in YouTube content creation like myself, but also being in the speedrunning world, which people also don't understand.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, dude, that's a deep question because, okay. Like,
All right, I'm already busting out the drinks for the serious topic.
It's, yeah, of course. That's totally fine. I have noticed that recently you've been putting a lot more stuff out and stuff. And I thought that was really cool. So I'm not super surprised that that's a question that you asked, to be honest. What I would say though is, yeah, I mean, it's way hard. It's, for me personally, I mean, I was in a really bad spot and I had a deadline and I had to be making enough money to do it in that deadline, or I was fucked and I had to give up on it. So I sacrificed everything for like 2, almost 3 years and just grinded it out. And it was fucking hard. And honestly, it wasn't worth it. So like, if, I just don't sacrifice your personal life to do it. It's not worth it. Like, I've done it and I'm super proud of myself for where I am and stuff. And I wouldn't take it back having done it. But as an advice to someone else who, could potentially be in the same spot, your personal life, your friends, your family, any relationships that you could be in, don't sacrifice them. It's not worth it. At the end of the day, it's just a job.
Yeah.
And you can always do it for fun. And if the opportunity arises, go for it. But don't sacrifice everything to do it. I did that, and it's not worth it.
Yeah, that's the hard balance to find with it. And I mean, sometimes I go overboard, and sometimes I balance it out. Like I always have 2 to 3 backup videos like already uploaded and ready to publish at any moment, just in case I need a fucking week to myself, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
I haven't gotten there, but I'm asking. I'm not asking so much about how it consumes your life, but like does it affect your like the way you talk to people? Like how do you handle family reunions when you're talking to Aunt May about like, well, I'm really into speedrunning and I also have a YouTube channel where I'm making videos and people are talking about their sports games or what they're doing at the office for sure. Do you ever feel just kind of like disconnected from what everyone else is like involved in?
Sometimes. I mean, when there was a time like about a year ago where I was like, okay, I made it. Like I can start to put myself into society and stuff. And at that point, that was really hard to be able to have like normal conversations with other people about stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but like it's kind of awkward. Like, what have you been doing? Like, oh, well, I'm gonna make videos on the internet about playing video games well and quickly.
I'm working on a script. I'm editing this video, and they're like,
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so I mean, for me, I just don't really. I just don't talk about it. No one really understands or cares that much. And so, I mean, I have my audience if I want to talk about what I'm talking about.
Sure.
Right. So like when I'm streaming, I just talk about it or whatever. And then when I go hang out with friends or whatnot, like sometimes they'll ask me because they're curious and I'll tell them what I'm doing and stuff. But I mostly just focus on the big things. Like, oh, I threw this tournament, or, I did this charity event or whatever, stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, some people like, if they don't understand, you can't make them understand. And I just usually just try to talk about other stuff or talk with them about them or whatever, because it's just like, I mean, I'm doing my thing and I'm happy and I'm healthy and blah, blah, blah. And,
totally.
That's just how it goes.
I've pretty much ended up. I mean, after doing this for a few years, I kind of had to figure out what the balance was, what the balance is, and I
That's
think
awesome.
I'm thinking pretty much in the same spot what you just said. Like if people ask about it, you know, you want to talk about it, sure. But like if you just go in, if you go to the to the party and you just start talking to
Yeah,
everybody
I'm a
about
YouTuber. I got this play
yeah.
button at home.
You're just like,
Yeah,
hey, here's a screenshot of the editing timeline for my upcoming video, and they're like, what are all these colors? I'm like, well, this color represents, but like,
yeah,
you can't do that. You just can't do
yeah.
it.
I mean, I found that people are usually pretty interested, but they just have like no idea what it is.
Yeah,
It just depends. And so you're just like, yeah, man, this is what I do or whatever. And they're usually like, oh, that's awesome. Like, that's cool or whatever. And I mean, I don't think that's that different from most people's jobs. I don't think most people understand what other people do for jobs either. Like, you go up to your homie from high school or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I'm like a mechanical engineer. And you're like, that's awesome. Good for you. You have no fucking idea what that means. Like,
you build engines.
yeah, that's crazy.
Oh man, well, this has been a really cool talk, waifu. I appreciate you coming on here. I think listeners are really going to enjoy this. I think hopefully some people on both of our sides get to hear this and enjoy the talk.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. I love stuff like this.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Good luck with the runs. Good luck with whatever next game it is that you learn to master.
Thank you.
And tell me when that video on the speedrunning updates is out for RE4, and I'll give it a share and get some.
Should be out tomorrow.
Okay, awesome. Well, this interview will probably be up at the end of the week, so it'll already be out then.
Oh, gotcha. So it'll already be out then. Cool.
Okay, all right. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. Make sure you check out WaifuRuns on YouTube. He's also on Twitch, and we'll see you later. Bye bye.
Later.